Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old, and today we're talking about Jean-Michel Jarre's Geometry of Love. Only one more after this, guys. So yesterday I talked about Jarre's Sessions 2000 album, Jarre's unexpected turn into lounge jazz. This next album appeared to be largely in the same mold. Another album of lounge music, but this time more electronic heavy, and also commissioned as a soundtrack to a VIP room at a club for someone. Now going back to Sessions 2000, some people had rumors that that album was more created for Jarre to get out of a record contract, hence it wasn't really concerned with being commercially successful. But aside from the non-marketability of a smooth jazz album like that, and possibly also the fact that it looks like it was put together over 6 days, spread across 1 year from those track titles, I don't think I ever would have guessed it was done for something like that. If I didn't know better, I'd guess this album here was more designed to escape the contract. Okay, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself a bit here. I really don't think this album is bad. It still fits into my taste pretty well. I've always enjoyed this brand of light, electro-infused, down-tempo lounge music. And I like that Jarre is still fleshing out his catalog with more variety like this. But first of all, I preferred Sessions 2000's stab at this sound more. The instrumentation was more appealing to me, the free-flowing nature of it all. It made a more fun listen as well. Geometry of Love seems like it's a bit more fleshed out, but the heavier focus on the electronic sound I think makes it less special for me. On top of that, I can tell in two certain points where Jarre kind of cut a corner by using acid loops. Yes, there are melodic phrases in this album that I myself have legal access to use right now. In fact, the album begins with one. The track Pleasure Principle starts with these ocean sound effects and goes into the sounds of some strings. And that entire string phrase at the beginning is one loop that I've even used before without realizing Jarre beat me to it long ago. To be fair, the track I used it in isn't very good. Jarre utilized the strings in Pleasure Principle much better than I did in my own track, called I Thought You Hated Noodles. I did that with my brother, he came up with the title. But still, I don't really like when I hear an album from an artist I like and end up hearing sounds I've used before. The other point at which I heard an acid loop was in the track Soul Intrusion, the little progression of bubbly synths in the intro of that one that continually go throughout underneath the whole thing. I went on to use that loop in my own track The Swirl in 2011, again, before I'd heard this album the first time. And also, to be fair, it sounds like Jarre kind of re-recorded these loops with his own synths rather than just taking the loops as I know them. Those strings in Pleasure Principle, for instance, sound a lot clearer than the loops I have. But yeah, it's still the same exact notes. I personally find it pretty distracting, and it did definitely bring down my opinion of the whole album. Especially given my image of Jarre being the kind of artist who puts a ton of work into every project. This one just doesn't feel like he cared about it as much as some of the other ones. I guess someone did commission it after all, but my point still stands. And even so, even though the loops are distracting, they don't ruin the album. They bring it down somewhat, but they don't make me hate this album. Because other than that, I don't really have any objections to the material on this album. And again, I like that he made this more low-key, low-stakes album with a lot more intimate and chilled-out sounds than he usually brings in. The two parts of the title track provide a bit more energetic flair with loops of strings with a hard cut in it, because why not? Along with synth solos that imitate guitar, sort of, and in the second part of the title track, a set of synth melodies, it sounds like voices come in as well. And the other tracks in between show plenty of nice sounds and vibes I enjoyed. Really not an outright bad track in the bunch. And even though this kind of album is not typically characteristic of Jarre, there are many moments here that still do show Jarre is in fact the brains behind this. Stuff like the subtly more bombastic string and timpani combination at one point on Velvet Road, or the classical influenced chord progressions on Electric Flesh especially really provide that sort of melancholy tone, even if the tempo picks up later on. And that kind of chord progression is definitely recognizable as Jarre. I think the beginning of that track had a barely noticeable callback to Waiting for Cousteau as well. There's a lot of track with nice piano solos as well, like the one laid over the sequences of Skin Paradox, or just presented by themselves on near Djaina. I thought that title was referencing a city in Africa somewhere, but it was the nickname for his girlfriend at the time. But like, I don't really have much else to say on this album. None of the tracks here are the kind of thing that stick in my mind much, besides maybe some moments which stick in my mind for the wrong reasons, as mentioned above. I don't think this album has any of Jarre's top-tier work or deliver anything truly essential. It is just one of Jarre's least essential albums in general, unfortunately. But I would be lying if I said you out to just avoid it entirely. Like I said, I still enjoy this whole thing. I think every track on this album has at least something to like about it. And I do very much enjoy the vibe this album creates, and again, I like Jarre's trying something different from the norm. And it embodies its title well, too, being a much more intimate release, but still quite electronic and calculated. Geometry of Love, I will admit, is a very good title for this album. But yeah, I mean, overall I think it's a good album, one I'm likely to keep on my iPod after this video is done, but it's also not one that I think people really ought to go out of their way to check out. I would personally much more highly recommend Sessions 2000 if you want a good lounge album from Jarre. I just found that one more interesting and enjoyable, personally. This one is nothing incredible. It's one of the lowest ranked Jarre albums for me, personally, but there's still definitely at least some value to be found here I could take away. I think it's worth a shot regardless. I think this one gets away with a solid 7. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. If you want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So that's all for today. See you next time. That car's fine, shut up.